Welcome back to the Bulletin Desk, bringing you the latest news from around the world. For over a century, Canada and the United States set the global standard for international cooperation. Bound by geography, history, and a shared vision for prosperity, these two nations built a relationship rooted in common values, language, and mutual respect. Their partnership was more than just political, it was personal, woven into the daily lives of millions who lived, worked, and dreamed across the world's longest undefended border. This border, stretching thousands of miles, symbolized not just peace, but a unique economic and cultural integration that was the envy of the world. But in early 2025, that partnership fractured. What began as minor trade disputes quickly escalated, spiraling into a full-blown trade war that would redefine the very fabric of North America. The shockwaves were immediate and profound, shaking the foundations of trust that had taken generations to build. This wasn't just about tariffs or trade balances, it was an ideological rift, a clash of national priorities that forced Canada to fundamentally rethink its place in the world and its relationship with its closest neighbor. The conflict's roots lay in a renewed America First doctrine. Washington accused Canada of unfair advantage, and rhetoric on both sides escalated, pushing tensions far beyond the realm of negotiation and compromise. Suddenly, the integrated economic model that had defined the continent for decades was under siege. The crisis exposed the fragility of their interdependence, revealing just how vulnerable both nations were to political shifts and economic shocks. This story explores the anatomy of the 2025 trade war, its origins, the policies that followed, and the human stories behind the headlines. We'll examine the consequences for both nations, from lost jobs and shuttered factories to the shifting alliances that would reshape the global order. We'll see how Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, responded with bold infrastructure investments and a sweeping vision for a new economic future. Canada's strategic pivot away from the US would set the stage for a new era, one defined by resilience, innovation, and global ambition. The events of 2025 mark a turning point, one that shattered old assumptions, tested the strength of two nations, and set both Canada and the United States on uncertain, divergent paths into the future. The trade war erupted in August 2025, sending shockwaves through both countries and dominating headlines across North America. What began as a simmering dispute over trade imbalances and market access quickly escalated into a full-blown economic confrontation. The Trump administration, determined to protect American industries, imposed sweeping tariffs, some reaching as high as 50%, on a wide range of Canadian goods. The announcement was made with fanfare, signaling a new era of economic brinkmanship. These weren't targeted measures, they struck at the very heart of Canada's economy. Auto parts, steel, aluminum, and lumber, industries that employ hundreds of thousands and form the backbone of countless communities. While some energy exports were spared, a calculated move to protect U.S. interests and avoid disrupting American supply chains, the message from Washington was unmistakable. America would use its economic leverage to dictate the terms of trade. Almost overnight, Canadian factories and mills saw orders vanish, production lines grind to a halt, and workers sent home. The livelihoods of thousands were suddenly at risk, and entire towns faced an uncertain future. Washington assumed that Canada, with the vast majority of its exports heading south, would have no choice but to capitulate quickly and accept new terms. But the scale and hostility of the tariffs had an unintended effect. Instead of sowing division, they united Canadians in defiance, sparking rallies and protests across the country. Rather than compliance, the U.S. provoked a surge of national resolve. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, and policymakers began urgently seeking ways to break free from economic dependency and chart a new path forward. The trade war, intended to force Canada's hand, instead became a catalyst for transformation. New investments in technology, infrastructure, and renewable energy signaled a determination to adapt and thrive. The U.S. underestimated Canada's willingness to endure hardship and chart a new course, even in the face of economic adversity. The stage was set for a dramatic response from Ottawa as the nation prepared to fight back on its own terms. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government responded not with retaliation, but with a calculated and visionary approach. Rather than escalating tensions or resorting to protectionism, Carney's administration recognized the need for a fundamental shift in Canada's economic strategy. They issued a bold declaration of economic sovereignty, signaling to both Canadians and the world that the country would chart its own course, independent of external pressures. Canada immediately launched an aggressive campaign to diversify its trade relationships, dispatching high-level missions to Asia and Europe. The goal was to secure new markets, reduce reliance on traditional partners, and open doors for Canadian businesses in rapidly growing economies. Fast-track trade deals and strengthened partnerships were negotiated at record speed, aiming to make Canada less vulnerable to the unpredictable whims of its southern neighbor. At home, Ottawa committed billions to innovation, supporting businesses that chose to reshore operations and invest in the future of Canadian industry. Startups in artificial intelligence, clean technology, and advanced manufacturing received unprecedented support, fueling a new wave of entrepreneurship and job creation. The overarching goal was clear: to build a resilient, globally focused economy that would no longer be tethered to the fortunes or decisions of the United States. This was a historic gamble, abandoning decades of North American integration and venturing into uncharted territory, with all the risks and opportunities that entailed. Carney addressed the nation, urging Canadians to embrace the challenge and see it as a defining moment for national independence and self-determination. The message was unmistakable. The old model was gone, and the future demanded bold reinvention, creative thinking, and collective effort. Canada was ready to rebuild, not retreat, determined to turn adversity into opportunity and chart a new path forward. The pivot would require unity, significant investment, and a willingness to face hard truths together. But for many, it was a chance to redefine what it meant to be Canadian in a rapidly changing world. Canada's new direction took shape with a massive infrastructure plan, unveiled in September 2025. Billions were committed to reorient trade routes from north-south to east-west, connecting resources to global markets via Pacific and Atlantic ports. New pipelines, expanded shipping hubs, and upgraded rail corridors aimed to bypass U.S. bottlenecks and open Canada to the world. A new Pacific shipping hub and the expansion of Prince Rupert's Port would boost exports to Asia. The plan was more than economic. It was a project of national unity and independence. By investing in its own trade arteries, Canada signaled it would no longer be captive to a single market. The infrastructure build-out was the backbone of a new globally oriented Canadian economy. Canada was laying the groundwork for a future beyond the U.S. At the heart of Canada's strategy were flagship projects to harness its natural resources for global markets. The Kitimat LNG terminal expansion would double export capacity, targeting energy-hungry Asian economies. Canada also fast-tracked new copper mines, positioning itself as a key supplier for the green transition. To power this growth, Ottawa approved a new nuclear reactor, controversial but essential for low-carbon energy independence. These projects, LNG, copper, nuclear, form the core of a new economic engine, shifting away from U.S. integration. Canada aimed to leverage its resources for global influence, not just as a supplier to its southern neighbor. Each project was a step toward self-reliance and a diversified future. Canada's prosperity would now depend on its global reach, not Washington's favor. The tariffs meant to protect American jobs quickly backfired, raising costs for U.S. businesses and consumers. Construction and manufacturing faced soaring prices as Canadian materials became scarce, driving up costs for homes, cars, and everyday goods. Retailers passed these increases to consumers, squeezing household budgets and fueling inflation. Studies warned that the trade war could push nearly 1 million Americans into poverty by 2026. Legal challenges and uncertainty paralyzed investment, especially in states deeply tied to Canadian trade. The conflict also exposed U.S. energy vulnerabilities, as threats to Canadian electricity exports alarmed states like New York. The trade war revealed America's own dependencies and the risks of weaponizing trade. Instead of strength, the U.S. found itself facing new anxieties and strategic setbacks. Carney's vision of economic sovereignty faced fierce resistance at home. Environmentalists decried the expansion of fossil fuel exports and the nuclear reactor, calling it a betrayal of climate commitments. Public hearings grew heated, with critics demanding more consultation and environmental safeguards. Indigenous communities whose lands were targeted for new pipelines and mines demanded meaningful consultation and a share of benefits. Legal threats and protests underscored the need for true partnership, not top-down development. The government struggled to balance rapid growth with environmental stewardship and indigenous rights. The push for sovereignty abroad exposed deep divisions at home. Canada's path to independence would require consensus, not just ambition. The US-Canada trade war sent shockwaves through the global trading system, signaling a retreat from decades of integration. Other nations, watching the collapse of North America's partnership, began reassessing their own trade dependencies. Canada's pivot became a model for middle powers seeking to diversify and insulate themselves from superpower pressures. The conflict weakened international institutions like the WTO, as unilateral tariffs bypassed established rules. Protectionism and economic rivalry became the new normal, fragmenting the global economy. The era of cooperation gave way to competition, with economic tools now wielded as weapons, even against allies. The unraveling of US-Canada ties marked the end of the post-Cold War global order. The world was entering a more uncertain, contentious era of realignment. The 2025 trade war ended a historic era of US-Canada partnership, replacing trust with rivalry. Even if tariffs vanished, the damage and Canada's new direction are likely permanent. Canada's investment in global markets signals a future where the US is just one partner among many. The path to sovereignty is filled with promise and peril, demanding innovation and reconciliation at home. For the US, the conflict exposed the limits of protectionism and the risks of alienating allies. North America is now a continent of competitors, not collaborators. The legacy of 2025 is a fundamental realignment, proof that even the strongest bonds can unravel in an age of uncertainty. The quiet continent is quiet no more.